So, let's move on to renal chemistry. Renal chemistry refers to the kidneys. The kidneys are two organs within the loins. So if you were to put your hands roughly where a bodybuilder puts their thumbs to try and raise their lats up, you'll be putting your thumbs just above where the kidneys tend to be. The kidneys are an important structure in removing waste products, but also in maintaining the blood pressure. So what does a renal chemistry profile include? We sometimes refer to the renal chemistry as U and E's, the U being urea and the E being electrolytes. Sodium is our first electrolyte, and sodium is one of the most abundant elements within the body, and it's really important for every single cellular process. Your sodium and potassium, which I've listed here, are kept within strict concentrations in order to allow all cellular processes to actually function correctly. Now, in our panel, we can't test potassium. Potassium is untestable in the context of a travelling blood sample, simply because it will give it's one of the biggest culprits for false positives. As your red blood cells and all of your cells are formed of essentially big bags of potassium, if those cells were to break and leak out into the solution, then when you look at the amount of potassium there, it would be far greater than it actually is, and it would make us worry. So we don't test potassium as a result of that. It won't give us any good information. Creatinine and urea are the last two elements. So the urea is part of the U and E's, as I said. The U is urea, and urea and creatinine are both toxic byproducts of metabolism that need to be cleared. But we can use the creatinine to calculate the eGFR, the estimated glomerular filtration rates. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we call it eGFR. And that is literally just referring to the rate at which the kidneys are performing their filtering functions. They're trying to filter all of the different toxic metabolites, creatinine and urea, and they get rid of that through the urine, which is why we urinate several times a day, to get rid of all of these different compounds. But the job of the kidneys is to also keep that sodium and potassium at a good level, at what we call equilibrium, so that all of these different processes can take place adequately and appropriately. So where do they come from? So as I said already, cellular balance, sodium is important. Sodium and potassium are both important for all of these different functions. They flow in and out of the cells, which trigger responses and allow for different cellular processes to happen at different times. The list would be endless if we tried to write out all of these different processes, obviously. And waste products of metabolism, especially when we talk about muscles, creatinine is a big toxic waste product that comes from the use of your muscles. So we want to try and get rid of that as we can, as we're able to. So the amounts of the creatinine in the blood will be dependent on the amount that's being created versus the amount that's being excreted. So when you have a lot of muscle, you're more likely to have a lot of creatinine, and if you have less muscle, you're likely to have less creatinine. So sometimes we need to take those things into account when we look at the amount of creatinine that's actually in the blood, and then when we try to make our calculations of how quickly the blood is being filtered. Why is it important to health? Well, we've covered a lot of this, but the sodium specifically is really important in maintaining fluid balance and therefore maintaining our blood pressure. So the blood pressure needs to be kept at an acceptable level to keep your brain and your body perfused. That means getting the blood to where it needs to be, and therefore getting oxygen to those tissues. Without adequate fluid balance, without appropriate management of sodium, we will not have that. And so we keep an eye on that. It's also important in heart health as well. The kidneys are really important in working with the heart to maintain blood pressure, as I said. And when you have issues with the kidneys, you are destined to have problems with the heart as well. So looking after your kidneys is of vital importance. Lastly, it's important for bone health as well. The kidneys have a major role in the creation of vitamin D. And when I say creation, I mean turning it into a usable form. So it's easy to say vitamin D is not just a single compound. It's a compound that has to go to the kidneys and the liver in order to get to a point where it's an actual usable state. And vitamin D is of vital importance to bone health, which we'll cover again later on.